Americans will remember Dick Cheney as the vice president who shot his friend. Americans who care about politics will remember Dick Cheney as the vice president who was the most powerful vice president in the history of America. Americans who care about politics and the rest of the world remember Dick Cheney as the vice president who do anything to ensure America have access to all the oil in the world. Patriotic American he was. I personally will remember Dick Cheney as the US vice president who almost got arrested in Nigeria. That story will never not be funny to me because Nigeria was preparing to indict Dick Cheney for corruption and bribery. Dick Cheney's company, Halliburton, paid Nigerian's government $250 million and they dropped the charges against Dick Cheney and everybody. Nigeria is not a real place. My name is Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I talk about foreign policy and trade-related issues from the perspective of an African. So, Dick Cheney would go down in history as the US vice president whose career has the most events that deeply affected Africa. From his vote on Nelson Mandela to the Africa Command setup to, the energy task force. We'll get into all of that in future. But in this video, because he passed away recently, I want to send condolences to the family of Dick Cheney and also share a story that is very light-hearted. It is a corruption story. I just say it's highlighted because, it's Nigeria. So Dick Cheney, this part is important to lay up the story that happened in Nigeria. Before Dick Cheney became vice president, he was the CEO of an oil company called Halliburton. And as the CEO of the oil company, he lived in Dallas, Texas. Fun fact, you can't be president and vice president of the US and residents of the same state. What that means is that the president of the US and the vice president of the US have to be residents of different states. And both Dick Cheney and President Bush were residents of the state of Texas. So, when George Bush appointed Dick Cheney to be his running mate for the 2000 election, Dick Cheney moved from Texas to Wyoming and became a resident of Wyoming. He just changed his driver's license. That's all you need to do. And then, but this part of the story happened before he moved to Wyoming. When he was living in Dallas as the CEO of Halliburton, he acquired another company called KBR. So KBR is a construction and engineering company that also operated in Nigeria, even though their headquarters was in Houston, Texas. And so in 1994, KBR had a high-powered meeting with all the executives, some executives of another company in Japan and executives of another company in Italy. And the three companies came together and decided that in order to do business in Nigeria, we need to bribe people. So they had a business meeting, high-powered business meeting that bribery is something they have to do business in Nigeria. And in 1994, the president of Nigeria was Sani Abacha. So we know that it's true that you have to do bribe in Nigeria to be, successful. And so from 1994, they started bribing the leaders of Nigeria. They disguised their bribes as sham contracts and they paid the money through bank accounts in Switzerland and Monaco. They actually hired two agents, one from the UK and the other from Japan, to facilitate these bribery operations in Nigeria. And so they bribed the leaders of Nigeria from 1994 to 2004. And while the bribery was ongoing in Nigeria, the Cheney company Halliburton bought KBR. And even after acquiring KBR, the bribery continued. So basically, Dick Cheney was the CEO of a company that owned another company that was bribing companies and government in Nigeria. That is why he was wanted in Nigeria. And fun fact, I said the bribery happened from 1994 to 2004. Sani Abacha left office in 1998, which means that they kept the bribery going on from when Obasanjo was in office. So it doesn't matter whether Nigeria is under military rule or civilian rule, the corruption there go happen. So this was happening, and Dick Cheney left to become the vice president of the US. That happened, and he faced off. Then February 2009, Obama came to office, and they started investigation into Halliburton, the company Dick Cheney was CEO of. And they found that Halliburton and their subsidiary company KBR broke the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act because they bribed Nigerian leaders to a tune of $180 million. Yeah, they paid $180 million to people in Nigeria, and they got benefit of $6 billion. They actually built a natural gas plant in southern Nigeria that made them about $6 billion. They had 4 contracts in Nigeria based on all these bribes they did. It's a serious thing. And so the company Halliburton, their subsidiary company KBR, and the CEO of KBR were all charged with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a law that is in place in Nigeria, in the US, to stop American companies from bribing governments outside of America. And so, while these charges were ongoing, it became clear that Nigerian government was corrupt. And Nigerian government was embarrassed by this. So, in December 2010, EFCC, I was about to sing it because I know Nigerian singers like complaining about EFCC. The EFCC is the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. They're in charge of, investigations into corruption, bribery, internet fraud, all this stuff, right? And so EFCC raided the offices of Halliburton in Lagos. And they started investigations, and they announced that they were going to indict the executives of Halliburton, including Vice President Dick Cheney, because he was the CEO who was in charge of the bribe from 1998 to 2001. So many years of the bribery and corruption that happened, he was in charge of it as a CEO. But Dick Cheney wasn't indicted in the case in the US. They are not going to embarrass their vice president like that. But because Nigeria was embarrassed by the case that the US brought in 2009, they wanted to also embarrass the US by indicting the vice president. So Halliburton and KBR went to the leaders of the EFCC and the government of Nigeria and told them that, you know what, we are sorry. We are wrong for what we did. We want to pay a fine of $250 million if you drop the charges against us and, the vice president. And so Nigeria accepted the offer and dropped the charges against everybody. They said they were going to continue investigations into the leaders in Nigeria who took the bribe. To date, have that happened? I don't know. You tell me, have that happened? Anyway, I wanted to highlight that story because it's just been announced that Vice President Dick Cheney has lost his life, and Vice President Dick Cheney will go down in history, as I said earlier, as a vice president who had a lot of dealings in Africa. I'm going to make another video. I said this week I'm going to do a video series called Trump in Africa. And I was going to focus on just Trump, but I was inspired by, I'm sorry, inspired may not be the right word. I was reminded by the passing of Dick Cheney that in order to get to Trump, maybe we should talk about some of the former leaders of the US whose stories lead us directly to Trump. So I'm going to share the story of how Dick Cheney and President Bush laid the foundation for what Trump did in Africa. All right. So I'll post this video this morning on today's Tuesday, November 4th. I would post the second video about Dick Cheney that will lead us to Trump this evening on, at maybe 9:59 or something. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to this channel if you are interested in that series.